Welcome, everyone, to the second installment of Reddit Rewinds. If you enjoyed our deep dive into cool stories and bizarre events in our first episode, you're in for a real treat today. We dive into plenty of spine-tingling stories, gripping mysteries, and amazing stories straight from Reddit. Be sure to follow our series and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single story, the distortion of the... Let's get started. Remember to keep the lights on. Has anyone stayed at 237 Stillwater Ard? I clean Airbnbs for a living. I've been doing it for about 2 years now and have recently started my own cleaning company. I used to work for a larger management company, but had some difficulties with my boss and the way that the business was run. Fuck you, Blake. So I quit and started managing a couple on my own. It doesn't pay too much, but I get to work on my own time and I'm my own boss. A large majority of the Airbnbs I clean are mom and pop owned, and since they don't have the time to clean it, they pay me to in-between guests. The properties are most of the time left relatively clean, but every once in a while we get shitty clients that will trash the place for a party or who knows what else. The worst I've had to do is scrub dried puke or throw away the occasional used condom, but it's worth it for the perks that come along with the job. I do most of my business through Craigslist, advertising my cleaning services to anyone in the area who may need help with their place. About a month ago, someone replied to my listing with nothing but the address of their property, the amount I could expect to be paid, and the first date it required cleaning. 237 Stillwater Road, $125, June 24th, 12 p.m. Although this may seem strange to someone new to or unfamiliar to the business, it's fairly common for the messages from the hosts to be this simple. It was part of the reason I enjoyed the job. I've never been a people person, so I enjoyed the simplicity of the little interaction I did with people within this business. I responded saying I could take the job and didn't give it a second thought. The rental looked run down from the outside, in desperate need of a paint job to replace the peeling white paint on the exterior of the house. Nestled on the top of a steep hill overlooking a large lake, which coincidentally harbored a few of the other houses I maintained. It was one story, with an unfinished basement indicated by the concrete foundation and the windows peeking just over the grass. However, the inside was a different story. Walking through the house, I found 2 fully furnished bedrooms, a kitchen, and an attached garage converted into a game room, and a couple of doors I assumed led to closets. The rental was surprisingly immaculate. It was as if it had not been touched in weeks. This was a surprise, as the listing said that the previous occupant had left no less than 2 hours ago. Walking through the house, not a single pillow or sheet in the bedrooms looked to be disturbed. No dishes sat in the sink waiting to be scrubbed. No crumbs or dirt dotted the carpet or stained wood floor. It's not uncommon for occupants to clean up the rental in order to avoid a large cleaning fee, but I'd never seen a rental this sterile. However, I pride myself on being thorough and decided to replace the sheets as well as vacuum the floors just to be safe. Upon getting to the kitchen, I noticed a door in the corner I did not previously note being there. Stuck to the door was another detail I must have passed over on the initial walkthrough. A sticky note displayed a simple request written in neat handwriting: replace salt in water softener. Through the door was a dark stairway leading into the basement. A lot of these old rentals had me do this as part of the routine. It was a menial task, but was inconvenient enough for me to often forget about, as they were usually out of the way, in basements or garage or other places that I rarely had any reason to go to. Forgetting was usually not a big deal, though, as these salt-dependent water softeners can often go weeks without being replenished. Since it was the first time I had cleaned this rental, and the owner had explicitly asked for it, I decided to not take the chance that it could wait. About halfway down the stairs, I realized that the light from the open kitchen door was failing. I turned around to realize that the door was shutting and raced to the top of the steps. My initial panic was met with the realization that the door was simply on old hinges and naturally closes on its own. I shivered as I understood that this meant I would not only have to walk down in the dark, but also walk up the stairs in the dark. While I had never been afraid of the dark or basements or things of that nature, there was something about being in an unfamiliar house, one which countless people have stayed at, and whose owner I had only briefly communicated with. This made me more uncomfortable than I can ever recall being. However, it was something that I needed to get done. Making it down to the hanging chain attached to the bulb was no big deal. A hurried walk down the stairs could easily make it to the chain before the door fully closed. I bet that even a relaxed walk could allow you to pull it in time, but that was not something I had the nerve to test. The area of the rental is the typical Midwestern unfinished basement. Concrete floors and exposed wood beams, it reminded me of my childhood home. The first thing you'll likely notice is the pungent mildew smell, which is considerably stronger than the average basement. A single light illuminates the entire space, but has to be pulled by a chain attached to the bulb, which requires one to walk into the basement with no light outside of the light from the kitchen door at the top of the stairs. A negligible amount of light is filtered through the grimy windows, mostly covered in cardboard, likely in a vain attempt to keep in heat during the harsh winters. There was old junk lining the walls of most of the basement on shelves or in boxes, and the water softener was located near one of the four corners in between the water heater and washer and dryer. The salt in the water softener was completely empty. Usually, it takes about a month for a full 4-person family to go through the salt if it is fully filled. Either the salt hadn't been replaced in about a month, if it was fully filled to begin with, or this rental somehow uses an almost impossible amount of water. Puzzled, but eager to get out of the basement, I poured one of the salt bags stacked against the side of the water softener into the maw of the machine. I contemplated leaving the basement light on and calling it a day, but it was my first time cleaning this rental, and I wanted to leave it as if I had never been there. Additionally, there was the possibility that the occupants would not find the light and turn it off, and the thought of having to replace the burnt-out bulb in the complete darkness made my skin crawl. I took a deep breath and tugged the chain down, plunging myself in complete darkness. I still have the scar from running up the stairs. I told myself I wouldn't sprint, but as soon as I pulled it off, a fear I haven't felt since childhood swept over me. My mind conjured forms in the darkness behind me, scraping the air inches away from my pant leg as I ran up the stairs, their shape changing every new step. About 2/3 of the way up the stairs, my foot caught on one of the steps, and as my knee connected with the stairs, a sharp pain radiated out from my kneecap. I scrambled to get myself up, wincing at the sharp pain, and scrambled up the remaining steps. I half expected the door to be locked when I made it to the small landing at the crest of the stairs, and let out a relieved sigh when I felt the door give. The shapes in my mind evaporated at the presence of the dying summer light pouring in through the kitchen windows. I felt my face blush with the embarrassment of the last 10 seconds, but another part of me insisted that my fear was justified. Trying to shake this feeling off, I did my final walkthrough of the house. By now, the adrenaline had worn off, and my leg throbbed with the memory of my tumble. After I was sure everything was up to my standards, I locked the front door, limped out to my car, and drove off. I have been cleaning this rental for just over a month now. Every time is the same. The house is immaculate when I arrive. There is a new note on the door to the basement, written in the same handwriting, but written on a different sticky note, or with slight variations in the print. The water softener is always empty, and I always have to dump salt to the fill line. For each bag of salt I go through, a new bag replaces the one I have used up the next time I show up. I have now given up on cleaning the rest of the rental, and am now going only to replace the salt. A single thing is different, though. I am more terrified of the basement each time I go. The shapes are closer. Sometimes I think I feel them brush my shirt of pant leg when I run up the stairs in the dark. Maybe I do. I've started to bring a flashlight on my daily trip into the basement, but this does little to reduce the thoughts in the back of my mind. I bring it regardless, as it's better than nothing. This notion of something else being in the room with me has started to follow me throughout the house. At first, I felt it only when I was in the basement. Then I felt it in the kitchen. Now I feel it when I enter the house. I have cleaned it every day since the first day. Every night, the owner will contact me with the address of the rental, the amount I can expect to be paid, tomorrow's date, and the time they expect me to clean it. I have never seen anyone staying there, nor any evidence of inhabitants within the house, but the house is always clean. I have never dusted, but no dust accumulates on the untouched furniture or shelves. No indentations on the couch where someone might have recently sat. The dishes are always in the same spot, none left out in the sink for me to clean. I have never even seen a car sitting in the driveway or a light on while simply passing by. There is something off about the reviews for this rental online. It is almost as if they are AI generated. They follow a very formulaic structure, with many of them sharing many phrases like "feels like home" or "we look forward to staying again." All of them are 5 stars, and not a single one says anything critical about the property. This feeling in the back of my mind has been eating at me, so I have officially put in a notice that I will clean for no more than 2 more weeks, and after that the host is on their own. In the meantime, I will update anyone who finds this. That leads me to the purpose of this post. I'm sure the odds are astronomically low, or if anyone even will see this, but I feel like I need to try. If so, please reply or DM me. Has anyone stayed at 237 Stillwater Ard? In 1987, a building agency was tasked with dismantling the old Renfield farm. It had a dark history of violence and horror. The farm was owned by a family of serial killers in the 60s until a shootout with the police shot a gas tank, which started a horrific fire in their home, and all that was left were bones. Scattered around the farm were bones which the police didn't know if they were human or animal. The family was reported numerous times by passers-by as animals without eyes or legs were seen being paraded around by the father. That was only a start to what the family did whilst living there. The builders moved their equipment and machines into the property a week before demolition. However, before demolition started, a potential buyer off the property surveyed the land, interested in its brutal past. The buyer walked around the farmhouse on his own until he started running back to his car screaming. He got in his car and sped off and was never heard from again, leaving the owner of the land confused. The potential buyer was found mutilated, with no eyes or legs. The week started as scheduled, and the builders started arriving early, but had to wait for the boss to arrive. He arrived 10 minutes late to find his annoyed colleagues waiting. The crew had over 20 people in it, so the boss registers who's present. Much to his surprise, 3 of his most loyal workers were missing. He carried on dishing out the tasks to 3 groups. Group A was to start clearing the barn. Group B was to start demolition on an old barn at the back of the property. And Group C started on the main house. They all had radio comms, which the boss checked in on them every 30 minutes. 30 minutes went past, and the boss radioed Group A, and there was no reply. He radioed the other groups to see if it was his radio not working, but they all responded. He walked over to the barn, and it was empty. Nothing had been touched, and it looked like no one has been there in years, apart from a few drops of blood. The blood was fresh, not dried. The boss radioed Group B, no reply. He tried radioing Group C, no reply. The boss knew the history and was terrified and ran to his car. He got in his car and drove up a dirt path to leave, but he was stopped in his tracks. His workers were all dead and dismembered, lying in a row in the middle of the road. And standing in front of them was the Renfield family. They had a sick grin across their face, and there was more of them than in the 70s. Suddenly the boss was dragged out of the car and hit over the back of the head. The next time he woke up was in the hospital with no eyes or no legs. The boss was also found with a tattoo stating "Renfields never die." The police carried out an assault on the farm with airborne bombs and drone explosives. All bodies of the family were recovered, and then the police figured out how all those years ago, how they escaped. A series of tunnels under the property fill with bodies each mile. The officers who cleared the scene all left their jobs and never returned home, but filled in this report, which is how we know so much. No one knows what happened to the officers, and the government doesn't acknowledge the officers disappearing. That was years ago, but the local government is set to build a house there on the grounds of the farm for the new mayor. The mayor insists he lives there. The mayor's name is Rick Narenfields. You see the name and what it has hidden in it. I can't let what happens to my dad happen to anyone else. Yes, I know so much because I'm the boss's son, and history will not repeat itself. Missing Boy's diary entry entered January 15th, 2018, went missing January 16th, 2018. You have to listen to me. This isn't right. You can't do this. You can't let this happen. Okay, hold on. Let me try again. Something different this time, calmer. Explain what's happening. Okay, my name is Nick. And as of right now, I am the last person on Earth. They called them quiet rooms. After the wave came, the remaining cities across the globe pulled together to gather their remaining resources in highly defensible areas. They called them hub cities, and the wealthiest of society lived closest to the hub, and thus had their pick of the Earth's remaining resources. This, of course, did not last long. 10 years of feeding the lower southern United States nothing but rice and potatoes saw to it that the class system came to an end in messy fashion. After the collapse of society, there was a great ravaging, and for a while, it looked as if we would eat ourselves to death, or worse, cannibalize each other. But then, under new leadership, we began consolidating. From the perspective of our leadership, not all mouths were worth the food they would eat. It began with those in the prisons, first those on death row, followed by the mentally insane. Those serving life came next, and not long after, simply committing a crime worthy of jail time all but assured your consolidation. This is when the quiet rooms came in. No one knows when the law was passed or who made the final decision, but suddenly, underground facilities began materializing in all major cities and in every little town. And after several years of quiet construction, small garage-sized buildings began to crop up wherever the construction had ended. Some families received enlistment papers. The necessary draft, they called it. We always joked later and called it what it really was, a necessary evil. That was until my papers came and I became one of the delivery men. Our job was simple: wait for orders to arrive and retrieve someone identified for scheduled consolidation, and take them to a quiet room. To resist these orders and the lawful determination of the remaining world's courts was a jailable offense, ultimately leading to immediate consolidation. The first week was the worst. Every morning I put on my uniform, holstered my regulation bolas, and patrolled the borders of our small town until I was relieved from my post. The times always changed, the hours were inconsistent, and I spent every waking minute wondering, praying and hoping that I wouldn't get the call. And I didn't, not for a long time. In the meantime, I continued to enjoy the hefty government check I received each month. I took pleasure in my ability to purchase groceries for my family or new clothes for my daughter without the worry of budgeting. I enjoyed the peace it instilled in me, and soon I became complacent, even trusting, of my government. I trusted that the only people being taken were those who truly did not deserve to stay. They had gone months without ever making me respond to a single order for retrieval. Maybe it would never come, I imagined, and if it did, well, maybe it was for good reason. And then the day came when I received my first call, my first order for retrieval. I went to a home, one I didn't recognize, and perhaps stupidly, knocked on the door. People poured out of their homes at the sight of me. Not approaching, rather, but watching in terror, disgust, and, oddly enough, curiosity. No one knew what to expect, as none of us had ever witnessed this happen before, myself included. And then the door opened, and I saw my package. An older man, hard in the face, with an intense stare and a jagged set of knuckles wrapped around the side of his entryway, steadying himself to look at me. He was old but strong, and he looked ready, poised to strike. But he didn't. He just looked at me and said, "Well, I suppose that's it then. I'm to go." I swallowed what little courage I had available and did my best to relax my vocal cords to say, in what I had hoped would be a determined voice, "Yes, unfortunately, I believe you are to come with me immediately, sir." I stammered toward the end, still feeling like some respect was owed, at the very least. I watched his face as he processed the information I had just laid at his feet and then glanced at the people surrounding us. At that moment, I believe he and I both realized that no one was willing to stop this. They all stood by and watched. They knew what I was here to do, that this was necessary, and that the remaining courts had their reasons. I held out my hand and directed the man to come outside of his home, and he followed suit after a brief moment of hesitation. He didn't bother to look behind him and even close his door as we walked side by side with me down the steps of his porch. We walked in silence for some time, through throngs of people, none of them doing anything to stop me, or him. Parents running into their homes with their children, others letting them watch, pointing as they told their children what their fates could be if they didn't behave and wash behind their ears like Mommy said. And I, in a strange way, felt proud of the example I was setting, horrified surely, but still hopeful that there was a reason this man did not deserve to live. And I writhed in those emotions for the duration of our walk to the quiet room, until finally we arrived at that small building just on the outside of town. The old man paused then. Now fear was clearly present in his mind. He looked at me in desperation and said, almost pleading, "Why me? What did I do?" I was perplexed. I assumed he would know, or at the very least have some idea. When he saw that I didn't, he looked horribly sad and said, "I just don't get it. I know my medications. They're expensive, but I always pay for them. I need them to help me sleep. The things I've done for this country, the people I hurt in other parts of the world, all in the name of my home, I never enjoyed them. They stayed with me, even when everyone else left me. So why? Why me? Why not you, or anyone else? What did I do?" he yelled, and people began to walk over to get a better look. The old man was riling them up, getting them excited as he began to lose control of his composure. He began to look out at them as he spoke now, saying, "You can't let this happen. This isn't right. Who decides who goes?" I started to shake. I knew what was about to happen. I knew what was coming if I didn't stop him from inciting a riot. I knew what awaited everyone in this town if they tried to fight the system put in place, and to my family. "Stop resisting, or I will be forced to use... force," I stammered out. At this, the old man did not back away, but instead took a step closer before I screamed, "Are you really going to be this selfish? Can you really not see how dangerous this is for everyone here? What do you think happens to them if you don't go? Or what might happen to me and my family if I don't deliver you? Did you ever think that maybe you need to go so the rest of us can stay?" And at that, everyone stopped, including the old man. And when he saw that he had lost them, he looked down in a deep, hollow sadness and turned again towards the doors of the quiet room. We walked slowly together to the doors, where he and I scanned our IDs until the doors opened and revealed a small, completely bare chamber with no windows, doors, or otherwise other defining features. A negative space, filled with darkness and blank walls and floors. The old man looked at me and I at him. We were both terrified, but then he began to walk forward, almost at his own surprise. He stopped in the center of the small chamber and just stared back at me. Nothing happened as we stared at each other. A hole didn't open up into the bottomless pit in the earth, and gas didn't begin to flood the chamber. Nothing happened until, finally, I began to close the door. The old man's eyes widened, but he did not stop me. Instead, he stood, watching me, as I closed the door. The last thing I remember seeing was his one eye, staring back at me in the darkness. One steely grey eye. And then the doors were closed, and I went home. Nothing else, no more pomp and circumstance. The checks kept coming, and eventually started getting larger, and I kept patrolling. People seemed at ease suddenly, as if a weight had been lifted. Someone had been chosen, no one else need worry any longer. And I was their hero. the one who protected them from the old man's fate. And then the second call came, and it was like the first time all over again. Everyone held their breath as I made my way to my package's address. When I knocked on the door this time, there was an audible yelp from the inside as a woman cried out in surprise and terror, likely. And then the door opened to a man in his 30s like me, with a young boy next to him. The sound of his wife crying behind him in the living room echoed into the entryway. He looked at me, up and down, as if to ask me what I was doing there. But then he said, Who are you here for?" And I thought for a moment. Nothing I received ever made it clear that I was supposed to be picking up one person or another, just the address. I looked at him as I came to that realization, and he came to it with me. He grabbed a suitcase next to the doorway and called his wife over, tousling his son's hair with a smile on his face. "Come along, my love. We have a trip to go on. Did you prepare your bag like we talked about?" he said to his wife from over his shoulder. I heard her choke, but then come around the corner, putting her hair behind her ears as she openly wept, holding a small case in her right hand. They walked out together, holding the hand of their son, who looked near catatonic. He had no clue what was happening, or perhaps knew exactly what was coming, but wasn't able in his youth to process it. We walked together to the quiet room, with no interruptions like before. We scanned our IDs and the doors opened, and inside, where I expected to see bones or some rotten, bloated carcass with some foul creature lurched over it, there was nothing. The same emptiness as before, just an empty room. The family looked at each other, confused and possibly relieved, and then slowly, with the husband leading the way, nearly dragging his wife in with him, stepped into the room and began to hold her in his arms, along with his son, as he stared out at me. And again, I closed the door, and remembered the look of his face as the door shut, and all was quiet once more. This was the procedure for a long time. We would go a few months of quiet, peaceful rumination, counting our blessings and appreciating the time we had with our families. I began to feel a sense of real purpose in my duty as a delivery man. I was helping people live fulfilled lives, making them safe from the dangers of those that are hiding in the shadows, waiting to be consolidated. And he was there to get the job done and provide that sense of security to his family and the people of his town. He was its protector, and it was his to protect. And soon the man began to receive more calls, and he would always respond in the dead of the night or at the crack of dawn. And soon he began to deliver his packages to their quiet rooms, twice a day, every day, for weeks. And soon he began to notice the way the town was flourishing. The remaining people now left behind, small in number though they were, led extravagant and lavish lives. He himself had enough food in his fridge to have a barbecue every day for the next month. Homes began to become larger, taking up the empty space where their neighbors had once been. A source of stable income became a pastime instead of a necessity, most people having enough in their savings to live like this for the rest of their days. And each day, after it began to slow down significantly, everyone else, much like Nick, began to hope that the following day would see someone else leaving. He could see it in their eyes every day he did his patrols. They would watch him and silently urge him to get rid of someone, anyone, to just go and knock on someone's door and get rid of them. Consolidate them so that those left could have more. He saw it. He knew it. But Nick was a man of principle. He was not a vigilante, handing out justice wherever he saw fit. He was a man of law and order, and he would await his orders. And soon, as he knew it would, they began to come in. His neighbors dwindled down slowly, to 10, and then, in one evening, to 7, and a month later, down to 3, until one day, almost without the hero realizing, he and his neighbor were the only ones left. And he smiled and waited, knowing one day the order would come, that he need not rush. But then one season came, and so did the other, and the order never came. And the hero waited, but still no call came. No order was given, and each day his neighbor began to look at him in hatred. The hero began to fear for his life, for the safety of his property and his family. He would watch his neighbor each night, making it known that he was in his sight, that he would not be caught unaware. But after the fourth night of not sleeping, the hero realized he needed to do something. Something had to give. He made the call. He walked to his neighbor's home, he knocked on the door, and he looked him in the eye and said it was his time to be delivered. The neighbor looked at the hero. His eyes were filled with anger, streaming with tears, his face turned down into a hideous grimace. The hero hated him, and so he demanded that he go with him to be delivered, and the neighbor complied with the orders given to him. They walked together, the neighbor seething in the hero's shadow, until they arrived at the quiet room, where the hero once again opened the doors for what would be his final delivery. The neighbor looked at the hero, looked behind himself, back at the city, and said, "Is this right?" The hero said nothing. He knew the neighbor, already knew the answer, and when he didn't respond, the neighbor stepped inside, and the hero closed the doors. It was quiet, and every day the hero would wake and do his patrols, his family, distant and fearful. And despite knowing there was no one else to deliver, the hero always waited for another call to come, waited for them to send him somewhere far away in some other part of the world where others needed delivering. He knew one day the call would come as it always had before. And right he was, but only partially, because while he did get the call, the address of the family that he was to have delivered was that of his own. He slowly made his way down the stairs, looked his wife in the eye. He had forgotten her name, but she cried now, cried as she realized that he was in his uniform, his bolas in his hand. And his children sit at the table, crying as well. He hadn't realized how grown they had become, or for that matter, remembered that there were in fact two of them. His wife began to weep and beg. She fell to her knees and thrashed her fists against the floor as she asked the hero for what she believed was mercy. But the only mercy the hero believed in now was the mercy granted by those who were ordered to be consolidated so that the rest of the world could go on living peacefully. And this was the final test, a test to show he was worthy of putting the world before his own happiness, to prove what he always knew, that he was a hero. And he used this fact to give him strength as he bound his family together using his bolas and dragged them out to the quiet room where he would complete his duty. Weeping now, the hero pulled his family as they thrashed and cried out against the restraints that bound their arms and legs together into the lightless chamber. They called out to him, called him a name he did not remember, but he had to push them out. He knew what he was doing was right, no matter how much it hurt. And with what was left of his strength, he pushed, and with a solid effort sealed the doors in front of him and screamed out in agony as he lost everything he loved. He wept for a long time, until finally he began to come to terms with his sacrifice. He stood up and began to walk away from the quiet room to await his next orders, when suddenly there was a thrum beneath his feet, and he turned to look behind him, and what he saw confused and rattled him. Behind the quiet room, the ground had split open and began to reveal a strange obsidian-like material protruding up from broken earth. The shape of it was strangely uniform, and it was accompanied by a loud whining sound as the ground beneath my feet began to rumble even more violently. And then, slowly at first, but then rapidly, the quiet room began to rise. I watched in awe as a structure began to reveal itself, hidden deep beneath the earth, and rise high above my head height before revealing clear glass. And inside, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. In a brightly lit white room, I could see my family. They were looking at me with hatred in their eyes, just like the people I had delivered, and they were standing in a large living space, with verdant and lush greenery surrounding every corner, like a localized terrarium. But then it wasn't just them, it was others too. People I had delivered, I had sent to be consolidated, and they all looked at me with hatred, and slowly I began to realize the structure was continuing to rise, now out of the ground and into the air. I looked in terror as I began to understand that I was being left behind, and then I saw him, the old man, his steely grey eyes looking back at me, and I flew into a rage. I screamed as the ship began to lift into the air. taking the remaining survivors of this planet to some other distant inhabitable planet that could support them. I did not scream as I watched in silence, as other ships began to lift into the skyline from towns and cities hundreds of miles away from me, as what remained of humanity fled the dying world that they had abandoned me in. And then I sat in silence until no more lights were visible from my meager view of the skyline. And I sat still, very still. Something grabbed my leg at the pool. I was on my last lap, just doing a leisurely breaststroke, when massive fingers wrapped around my thigh and dragged me down. I squirmed and tried to get away, but the fingers were wrapped tight. They had some form of suction cups. My ensuing struggle attracted the attention of the lifeguard. As soon as he came to my aid, the massive fingers let go. The guard believed me when I said that something had caught my leg. He inspected the area. But all he could find was a pink plastic wristband. "That's not what pulled me down," I said. He shrugged and put on the wristband. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the locker rooms, I swear I could hear something walking around, making large, squishy, plodding sounds. I stayed hidden in my change room, waiting for the sounds to stop. From beneath the change room curtain, I could see wet footprints. I could literally see large, towel-length footprints appear on the ground, out of nothing. Of course it freaked me out. And of course I gasped out loud. Before I knew it, the curtains opened and closed on their own. I was cornered in the back of the change room. I let out a half a scream before invisible wet fingers wrapped themselves around my face. My head was shoved against ceramic tiles. Fear froze me completely. A hot breath arrived, smelling like moldy fruit. Then a voice came. It was high-pitched and squeaky, choking a little on its own words. "No need to be scared. It's just me. Jumpy!" Like a chameleon, the skin of the creature slowly solidified into grey. One of its eyes was the size of my head. I would say it looked like one of those red-eyed tree frogs, except it was 9 feet tall, and it could easily kill me. It switched from holding my mouth to pressing its sticky fingers against my throat. "Remember me? Remember me?" No seemed like the wrong answer, so I just repeated the name it told me. "Jumpy? Yes! Yes!" The creature jumped up and down, still holding me by the throat. If I hadn't grabbed hold of its fingers, it might have hung me on the spot. "Jumpy! Jumpy frog! That's me!" I was dropped to the floor as it started to clap. The massive webbed hands created a deafening applause. "Marianne and Jamie made me when they were babies. I was their best friend." The frog jumped onto a wall effortlessly and peered down at my struggling body. "Every day I was with them. Every day I helped them." It was referring to my older twin sisters, who died last year in a car accident. Part of the reason I was out swimming so late is because that's how I've been coping with their passing. We all used to do synchronized swimming for many years. But now they're gone. They're gone. How terrible is that? The frog sounded like an overdramatic, sad cartoon. It teared up and pounded the very wall it was climbing. And now, no one believes in Jumpy. I was still recovering, breathing through a pinhole, but that didn't stop Jumpy from hoisting me by the leg. "You're the only Whittaker sister left. You have to believe in Jumpy." It felt like I was speaking through a tiny straw. "Have to? Yes, can't you see? I'm fading. I used to be green for Frog's sake." Jumpy shoved its forearm against my face. Some of the grey slime stuck to me. "If you don't believe in Jumpy, I'll die. And I don't want to die." The frog crawled to the ceiling and dangled me by the leg, high above the marble floor. "You have to believe in Jumpy. You have to." If I landed in the wrong way, I could easily break my neck or skull. I forced myself to sound happy. "I believe in Jumpy. I believe in Jumpy." For the first time in the entire encounter, the creature treated me like a porcelain doll. I was gently lowered to the floor and then patted on the head. "Good. Keep believing in Jumpy. Think about Jumpy every day." The frog made a gagging sound, then leapt back to the ceiling, leaving wet marks along the wood. "And if you stop believing in Jumpy, don't worry. I'll come back to remind you." The frog smiled in a way that made its giant eyes bulge and look in 2 opposite directions. I thought for a second it had a tongue lolling out of its mouth, but I peered closer and could make out a human hand in its lips. A human hand with a pink wristband. Jumpy slurped it up. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Since that encounter, I've basically been in a permanent state of fear, praying that Jumpy never visits me again. I'm an animator, so drawing is a hobby of mine. I've drawn countless sketches of Jumpy and left them around my house, my work, on my phone, etc. Not a day goes by without me seeing a picture of that frog. And that concludes the second installment of our Reddit Rewinds. We hope you were as captivated by these spine-tingling stories as we were. If you enjoyed this insight into the creepy and unsettling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow the series. We'll be back with hair-raising news and amazing news straight from the depths of Reddit. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep those lights on and stay curious.